Israel Update with Gadi Taub and Mike Duran. Hello and welcome to Israel Update. We're recording on a Wednesday. This time it's September 4th, 2024, 334 days to the war. This show is produced by Yaakov Wilner. I'm Gadi Taub in Tel Aviv, and Mike Duran is the co-host of this prestigious podcast, as you probably know by now, and also a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute. Hi, Mike.
Hello, Gadi. How are you?
Well, this week started like hell. It was terrible. We got the news here of 6 hostages executed by Hamas, and this happened just as the IDF forces were closing in, and that everyone here could not avoid the thought that these people hung on in there for 11 months of hell to be summarily executed in the last minute just before we could save them. So there was upheaval here and extreme reactions, and there were shock waves throughout the country and beyond the country, as you know, in America, globally, which prompted reactions from world leaders all over. So we'll have a lot to say about about Hamas, about the reactions in Israel, about what Israel should do, about the Prime Minister's response and other responses, about the U.S. And much else. But first, Mike, let's survey the news of the passing week.
Okay, so the Israeli Security Cabinet, that's the constitutional body that can decide matters of war and peace. It voted last Thursday to back Prime Minister Netanyahu's position in favor of maintaining an Israeli military presence along the Gaza-Egypt border as part of any potential ceasefire and hostage release deal. The debate reportedly included very heated exchanges between the defense minister, Yoav Gallant, and the prime minister. On Saturday, as you mentioned, Gadi, the IDF recovered the bodies of 6 hostages from a tunnel in Rafah, including the body of American citizen Hirsch Goldberg Poland. Autopsies showed that the hostages had been murdered within the last few days by Hamas. Protests erupted across Israel, blaming Prime Minister Netanyahu for not cutting a deal with Hamas on the release of the hostages. The critics of the prime minister depicted his demand that the IDF must maintain a presence in the corridor along the Egypt-Gaza border as a pretext designed to scuttle the hostages for prisoners deal. Israel's National Labor Federation, Histadrut, declared a strike for Monday, September 2nd, to push Netanyahu to accept a deal. On Monday, Netanyahu, in an hour-long press conference, explained that Israel would not withdraw from the Philadelphia corridor, that's the corridor between Egypt and Gaza, under any circumstances. Also on Monday, President Biden issued a one-word rebuke of Netanyahu. As he exited Marine One on the White House lawn, reporters asked whether Mr. Netanyahu was doing enough to achieve a deal to get the hostages back. The president responded simply, no. On Tuesday, Benny Gantz, the leader of the National Unity Party, said that Israel does not need to keep troops in the Philadelphia corridor for security reasons. He also said that claim should not be used as a reason to prevent a deal to bring back the remaining hostages from the Gaza Strip. Over to you, Gadi.
Yeah, so the first thing I'd like to note is the bifurcation of the of Twitter feed between left and right. And as you've seen, Mike, I made a 15-minute video about this in Hebrew, and there was a lot of talk about it here because it was very, very distinct. On the right, you saw outrage against Hamas. By the way, some outrage against Netanyahu also, but why? For not doing more to pressure Hamas, not for accepting the deal. And the right-wing feed was filled with suggestions, what to do now in order to retaliate, to exact a price for Hamas, to deter Hamas in the future. And these suggestions ranged from, some of them were clearly impossible, like immediately execute 100 terrorist prisoners, especially the ones that Hamas wants in an exchange deal, and then do 10 more every day or things like that, to a more moderate idea, or at least more legal idea. Let's legislate a capital punishment for terrorists, to mild suggestions like the ones we heard before the executions, like stop the so-called humanitarian aid until the hostages are freed, or at least until we have the Red Cross examining them, or even just a list of who they are. We don't have a list yet of who is alive and who is not, and who is held by whom. I'll go back to that later. So there was on the right-wing feed, there was outrage. On the left-wing feed, there was the right-wing feed, there was outraged at Hamas, and sometimes criticism of Netanyahu for not doing more to pressure Hamas. And then you turn the page to the left-wing feed, and I'm telling you, I follow the left-wing obsessions for a long time now, and their great influence in the way that the media covers everything, but especially this war. And we will talk later about how the media gets the story wrong. But I too was just shocked. I could not find a mention of Hamas, Mike. I went through hundreds of tweets, and in the end, I found 2 mentions of Hamas and 1 mention of Sינוואר in a tweet by Ehud Barak, former prime minister, former IDF commander. But that's just in passing, because all their anger is concentrated on Netanyahu, to the point where if you would land from Mars, you would think that Netanyahu murdered the hostages. Some people actually said that in these words. So let me. I don't know how much of this we can do. It's really horrible stuff.
Before you go, I even heard. I was, for personal reasons, I wasn't able to follow everything as closely as I usually do, but I dipped in now and then, and I saw one guy on Twitter accusing Netanyahu and the right of not being concerned about the hostages because they're from the wrong political camp.
Yeah,
which I just thought, I thought, man, you've really descended to the, and this is craziness to think this way.
This has been going on for a while. And I even heard, I don't know how true this is. I don't have independent verification, but some have said this, hostage families said something to that effect to Netanyahu, and some went so far as saying, if your son would have been there, you would have acted differently. To which reportedly the prime minister said, if my son were there, I would have thrown in the towel and said, I can't deal with this crisis because I'm too involved. I hope this is true, because that is what a prime minister should say in response to this. And when you're dealing with families of hostages, you can't criticize them, because they are living in hell, and so they can say anything.
You can't actually. I mean, why would I mean? It's just, your heart goes out to them, and you
absolutely.
It's not a rational discussion. It's
absolutely, but the demand that we run policy according to that is itself a corruption of political discourse. So let me read to you some of these things. I'll maybe start with something really deranged. This is by Leo Chorev, who is a strategist for the left and a political advisor. And he put a picture of one of the kidnapped children, and it says, Bibi, what did you put in the kids' sandwiches today? Did you spread Philadelphia for them? And that's an allusion to...
Oh, that's Philadelphia cream cheese.
Yeah, that's...
that's horrible. That's horrible.
I'm telling you, people have just lost it. People have lost it.
That's disgusting.
Merav Michaeli called the cabinet Netanyahu and the cabinet of death. Chaim Levinson, a provocateur journalist from Haaretz, said, sorry, Hirsch, sorry that we couldn't convince the narcissistic psychopath that leads us that your life is worth anything. Sheli Yechimovich, who is, by the way, mentioned Hamas, who is former head of the Labor Party, wrote that Netanyahu has erased all holy values that made Zionism a worthy and just enterprise. We are trapped in the clutches of a heartless distorted person who lives in his own skull, where he has no empathy and only despise for the lives of others. They could have been here already. May their memory be blessed. Netanyahu is a murderer. Moshe Radman is calling Netanyahu a son of a dog as opposed to son of a bitch. It's a different Hebrew emphasis. Yair Golan, current head of the Labor Party, Memshelet HaChurban, the cabinet of destruction, has decided to sentence the hostages to death. And Yair Lapid, the head of the opposition, instead of doing everything to return the hostages, Netanyahu is doing everything in order to stay in power. And I've already, and I won't read to you Ben Caspit, your favorite commentator, who of course said Netanyahu is sacrificing the hostages to stay in power. So first thing, Mike, to note is that Hamas does not exist here. This is only Netanyahu is responsible. And I've been saying, and I'm sorry if this sounds harsh, these people, I don't believe them for 1 second that their real concern is actually the hostages. And I'll tell you, there's now a way to test this. They have not made a single suggestion of how to pressure Hamas, how to deter Hamas from executing more hostages. They're not interested in this. And if you look back at the campaign for which they harnessed the families, they have not suggested even a mild thing like stop the so-called humanitarian aid, which, by the way, is what brought us the first deal in November. In November, before the deal, Hamas got 2 trucks a day of so-called humanitarian aid, and for the hostage deal, it got 200 trucks a day. That was part of the deal. And so long as this was going on, they released 10 hostages every day. Why are we not hearing from anyone on this left-wing feed any criticism of Hamas and any suggestion to the Israeli government to apply pressure on Hamas? Instead, they're applying pressure on the government of Israel after the execution of 6 hostages, Mike. This is, you deal with policy. Where in the world of policy does anyone believe that rewarding people with a better offer after they execute hostages is a good idea? This is just incentivizing Hamas to kill more hostages. Yihya Sinwar is sitting in a tunnel wherever he is, and is now rubbing his hands in glee, looking at this deranged reaction. I'm sorry for this emotional tirade. It blew my mind in the last few days. So, Mike, give us a sober tone after my eruption.
A sober tone. Why don't we take a step back here a little bit and discuss? There are two serious, but behind all of this emotional and highly politicized rhetoric, there are 2 different arguments on the national security front. And why don't we discuss them a little bit? Let me start just by reading some of the leaks that came out of the Security Cabinet meeting on Thursday night. The argument is on the left, or on the anti-Netanyahu camp, from the anti-Netanyahu camp, that Netanyahu forced a vote of the cabinet unexpectedly, and somehow this is also inappropriate to have the cabinet vote on staying in the Philadelphia corridor. But this provoked a really heated exchange between the defense minister and Netanyahu, and the defense minister then went, or one of his aides went and leaked to the press what he says, what they say went on between them. And so Gallant responded
and Netanyahu did not deny it. Nobody denied it on Netanyahu.
Yeah, nobody denied it. So this seems to be accurate, because Netanyahu explained that why he thought they needed to stay there. And Ron Dermer, his closest ally in the Security Cabinet, said that the Prime Minister has a right to have these views and a responsibility. And then Gallant said, as the Prime, this is presented as a direct quote, As the prime minister, you are authorized to bring to a vote any decision you want, including executing the hostages. And then Gallant told the ministers that passing the resolution to stay in the Philadelphia corridor would give Seinwar more leverage in the negotiations. Another direct quote: "We have to choose between the Philadelphia corridor and the hostages. We can't have both. If we vote, we might find out that either the hostages will die or we have to backtrack to release them." So now this took place. This took place before the hostages were found. So it had. So, but it created. I think that's part of my impression reading this from a distance. I'm asking you. This is what created a lot of the drama. Is that there's a sense that the government had this decision before them to vote on Philadelphia corridor hostages, and then 2 days later they find the dead hostages. So it seemingly validated what Gallant was saying. Gallant and also Gantz, also a former military man like Ehud Barak, they're coming in with all of the authority of the defense establishment, and big elements of the defense establishment are leaking to the press and saying, we do not have to stay in the Philadelphia corridor in order to protect Israel. They are depicting Netanyahu's explanation as to why Israel needs to stay there as itself a highly politicized decision, and from a technical military point of view, it's not necessary to stay there. And Netanyahu's answer to that, he gave this hour-long press conference, which I did watch on Monday, which I thought, by the way, was an outstanding presentation. But I'm predisposed to accept his arguments, but I have to admit, but even if I wasn't, I still think as just in terms of the craft of presenting complex arguments in a simple, understandable way, I thought it was extremely valuable. But anyway, his argument is Israel needs to stay there in order to prevent the smuggling of weapons and other dangerous materials into the Gaza Strip, and in order to defeat Hamas as a governing institution. Because as long as Hamas is on the other side of the border, it will control the economy. And he pointed out, as we've said here many times before, that yes, from a technical military standpoint, the military can go in with relative ease and retake the Philadelphia corridor, but it can't from an international and domestic political standpoint necessarily. And by the way, I would have argued further, I would have added, Netanyahu did not say this, that the actual methods of warfare have changed, and we've seen how hard it is to destroy tunnels and everything in Gaza, that even from a technical military point of view, it's not that easy. But Netanyahu pointed out that Ehud Barak in 2000 when leaving Lebanon, and Sharon in 2005 when leaving Gaza, and the whole everyone in Israel and during the Oslo process said, if we pull out of the West Bank, it's no problem. We can go back in whenever we want. At every major pullout by Israel, they've made this argument. So it has to be falling flat a little bit.
It is falling flat, and people showed clips of Sharon saying this, saying, stop scaring us. With Sharon made fun of this, stop talking about, yes, rockets will come and drones will come from above and submarines will come from underneath and tanks will roll, and he made a whole
and tunnels. He said and tunnels.
He said tunnels, yeah.
Yeah.
And everything he said actually happened, including the drones.
Right.
And then there was Shimon Peres, the dreamer, saying to Netanyahu, stop scaring everybody with these pessimistic visions. Nothing will happen. They portray them all as right-wing warmongers who are deaf to the drums of the progress of history. And we have documents of this. We have, and always security establishment people in Israel, they're mostly dovish. I don't know if it's this. There's such a thing anywhere else. Generals in Israel, after they finish, they have to prove that they that they hold a branch of an olive tree in their hand, and they have a bleeding heart, and they're humane. And also they're educated in American progressive universities. So you know where that goes. But if you look back at history, these same people said Oslo is good for security. These same people said this engagement from Gaza will only bring security and prosperity. And so I don't know that the pulling rank now is very useful with the Israeli public. One thing that the prime minister remarked in passing, and I thought was very important, and I actually tweeted that the same thought on Twitter a day before. If there are hostages, if we're closing in on Hamas and they are holding hostages, then if we leave the Philadelphia corridor now, even for one day, they can smuggle the hostages out. Yihya Sinwar and a bunch of hostages can disappear. So that's the idea that you can make an argument for the deal in the name of the hostages by leaving the Philadelphia corridor is dubious. Secondly, the demand of Hamas, and we'll go back to the question, is there a deal? There's no deal on the side of Hamas. We are discussing the Philadelphia corridor with ourselves. This is not the demand that Hamas is making, or at least this is a very minor in the whole list of demands that Hamas is making. But if you go for the deal that's on the table, the Biden deal, it's not a Hamas deal. If the deal that Israel accepted, you will have a small batch of hostages released in the first stage, and then the army will go out of Gaza, and including the Philadelphia corridor, and then you basically doom all the other hostages to death because you lose your leverage. So it's not even a coherent argument. But Mike, what is going on here is not an argument. It's a wild emotional wave. You can't speak with people. When you try to make a measured argument, which I appreciate your effort to do here successfully.
I convinced you, did I?
Yeah, you did. But you talk to people and they answer, what if your daughter was there? Imagine your daughter being in the hands of these animals. And that's not an argument about policy. If you doubt their stance in the slightest degree, then you're evil. And it's like the word racist in America. But the people who are behind this, and this is true, Gantz and Eisenkot made a shameful performance, in my opinion. They basically said Netanyahu is weak and can't stand pressure. If we were in power, we can go out of the Philadelphia corridor, and we have the guts and we have the backbone to step back in if we need to. This is Gantz, who bowed down to American pressure, who said...
This is my role here, because what has astounded me in following this debate from October 7th until now is how little Israelis are made aware by their own press of the impact of the United States on Israeli decision-making. The General Karilla of CENTCOM is in the room with the Israelis, making every major step. Everything is coordinated closely with the Americans, and Netanyahu is going as far toward the Americans as he can, but then also trying to push the limits in order to protect the Israeli national interest. That's how I see it. But the Americans want to Biden wants to bring down Netanyahu, and they want to weaken the Israeli right in general, and they want to bring down this government and replace it with a Gantz or a Lapid or a Bennett or anyone else. And so those guys have an interest in misrepresenting the factors that have slowed down the war effort. So they're saying, oh, look, he says we need the Philadelphia corridor, but we could have put pressure on Hamas. We could have defeated Hezbollah already, but he's actually so risk averse and so slow. The only reason he moves forward ever is because he gets pressure from Ben Gvir and Smotrich to move forward. Otherwise, they depict him as like a little ping pong ball between the Americans and Ben Gvir and Smotrich. And they suggest that if they were in charge, that they would be looking after the national interest. They would be standing up to the Americans where necessary and really focused on getting the hostages back and defeating Hamas and Hezbollah, and it would all be moving so much faster. What's so cynical about what they're doing is that they understand the dependence of the Israelis on the Americans, and they understand that the pressure that the Americans are putting on Israel is not simply focused on Netanyahu. They certainly want to bring down Netanyahu, but the pressure is to actually stop the war. The American vision of the day after is a Hamas-ruled Gaza. That's what they want. It's not what they want. It's what they. It's the least worst option in their minds. That's
here I'll take a step back and because this is a point I've been making, I think, randomly on our program, not necessarily in a very orderly way. But let me suggest a way to think about this for people like Gantz and Eisenkot, who are obviously not saying what they really think. They have a plan. And the way I portrayed it here in very simple terms is they want to finish this war without victory so that Israel would be weaker and more ready for American imposition of a return to the two-state track. And what they have in mind, and this is a historical, I don't know if metaphor, but example that I want to add here. Their example is Yom Kippur, the Yom Kippur War. In their interpretation, what happened is the Egyptians wanted peace. We now know that this is not true. They did not actually send peace feelers before the war. And you write about the Yom Kippur War, and so you know the details. But this is a story in the leftist mind. Before Yom Kippur, Egypt wanted peace, but we were too arrogant after the success of the 6 Days War. And so we rebuffed them. And then came the humbling experience of the Yom Kippur War. And then our arrogance was replaced with a new humility, and that prepared us for peace. And a major protagonist in this story is, of course, Henry Kissinger, who maneuvered at the end of the war to a situation where there would not be total victory over Egypt, so that both sides will save their face and will be able to reach a deal. So imagine just take all this structure and replant it on October 7. They think right. October 7, we thought we can continue the siege of Gaza forever, to just manage the conflict, never solving it. And then came October 7, and we suddenly were shocked. So if now Antony Blinken will be Kissinger and will prevent total victory and enable Hamas to save face, that's a horrible thought even to entertain after what they did. But the Palestinians, in any case, to save face somehow and bring back the Palestinian Authority without an Israeli victory, then Israel will be, and the Palestinians will be ripe to return to the negotiating table. That is their end game. I am absolutely sure of it, because it's a pre-programmed modus operandi with the Israeli left, the parts that are still Zionists on the left, and so they would fit this mold on any dramatic event.
I agree with you, and I've discussed this with Israelis close to the security establishment, or have this view, and it's interesting to see what they say. Of course, as we've discussed here many times, they bring in Saudi Arabia and the United States wanting to put together this anti-Iran coalition, which is just predicated on getting rid of Smotrich, Ben Gvir, and accepting the Palestinian Authority in Gaza. And if we do that, then this regional alliance against all evil develops. And I mean, that's sort of the stand-in for Anwar Sadat and Camp David is this mythical regional coalition that Biden is supposedly trying to put together against Iran. The other thing they say, which I think is a more serious argument, is the real fight is against Iran. We're not the center of gravity of that fight from a military point of view is Lebanon with Hezbollah. We're not ready for that fight at the moment. The army is tired. It's not prepared for the real fight. What we need is to buy time with the Americans so that we can then build up, retool, and get ready for the real fight. I don't know. I don't think that's a great argument, but it's more coherent, at least. I mean, it admits the world the way it is, rather than coming up with these fanciful notions of the Biden administration creating an anti-Iran coalition and all that.
Yeah, so just 2 remarks in the margins of what you said. In the fight between the two arguments, and I'll in a minute I'll say something about the balance. The media is misportraying the whole mood in Israel, or the mood in Israel's public. But the argument that they keep making, that the reason Netanyahu doesn't go with all this vision, is he wants to preserve his own seat in government, his own chair, as we say in Hebrew, הכיסא שלו. And then they say, let me read you what N12 says. It's the major propaganda outlet that is Israel's biggest commercial channel. So they quote someone senior in the government. It's probably Gallant, and Gallant says, or if it is Gallant, the question is if the coalition will survive the hostages, and Netanyahu or the hostages, if the coalition survives or the hostages, and Netanyahu chose the coalition. So this is the whole argument. The Ben Caspit argument is that Netanyahu is egotistically indifferent to the death of the hostages, so long as he can preserve his chair and satisfy Smotrich and Ben Gvir. And this is at heart an anti-democratic argument, because Netanyahu wants to save the coalition, that goes without saying, but he also represents the coalition, which represents the will of the majority. There is a majority of the Knesset behind this policy of not surrendering to Hamas. This is not some egotistical whim. Netanyahu is carrying out the will of the majority of Israelis, and that is what gives stability. If you looked carefully at his press conference, he did not for a minute even entertain all these arguments about him being egotistical or indifferent to hostages. He just made the argument on the basis of national policy. Now, it was woven into the presentation what everybody on the right at least think, that the left are actually undermining Israel's position in the negotiations designed to bring back the hostages, let alone its position in the war by this pressure on the Israeli government. So Netanyahu, as you remember, in the press conference, presented a slide of a document, handwritten Arabic document.
I was gonna raise this. I personally, well, I'm just going to say, I personally thought this was the most effective moment, because that document. So you introduced it, and I'll just tell you. But there's the word gallant in that document was incredibly powerful.
I published I tweeted out the slide with the name Gallant circled, and then a poster of Achim Laneshek, one of the brothers in arms, or as they call them now, brothers and sisters in arms, since they have to present it in America, but which is an anti-Netanyahu protest.
Hold on here. I interrupt you. Introduce the slide and then explain all this, because we haven't told our viewers what we're talking about. Okay, I shouldn't have interrupted you. I'm sorry. I just reacted like that because I'm glad you picked this out, because I think it was the most effective moment.
Okay. So what he presented was a handwritten note in Arabic, which was found in a Hamas tunnel. We were first told it was Yahya Sinwar. He said it's not. We're not sure it's Yahya Sinwar, but it's the Hamas leadership. By the way, another testimony to the fact that low tech is how they do their business, not on phones that Israel can listen to. And this handheld note had 4 points about how to conduct a policy vis-a-vis Israel. So I'll read the 4 points. To augment and turn up the volume of publishing pictures and videos of the hostages to create a psychological pressure, to do everything to exacerbate the pressure, the psychological pressure on Gallant, to continue the line that says that Netanyahu is responsible for everything that happened, to undermine the Israeli narrative as if the ground invasion of Gaza is serving the purpose of returning the hostages. So anyone who reads this is the talking points of the anti-Netanyahu left. It's just the talking points. It's what they do. And so now just let me return to what I started saying about my tweet. I'm quoting my own tweets often here, or as Justice Holmes used to say, if I may quote myself again. If I may quote myself again, I put this with the word Gallant circled and a poster of the Achim Laneshek, of the anti-Netanyahu a protest movement with a picture of Gallant, applying pressure on Gallant. So both are very shrewd. Both understood that Gallant is the weak link, and both are applying pressure on Gallant.
The amazing thing is that this document, I totally forgot about it until he put it up on the screen. It's from months and months ago. Back, I believe, when they went into Khan Yunis, maybe when they started in Khan Yunis. I could be wrong, but I think it came out of Khan Yunis. But it does show the psychological sophistication of Sinwar and just how much he understands the Israelis and how much he understands their the fractures between them. Isn't there a phrase in Hebrew to lirot batocha nagmash?
Yeah, to shoot inside the personnel carrier.
So the idea you're sitting inside, the troops are inside a personnel carrier and they're shooting at each other basically, while protected by the I can't find the words, man. Help me. The personnel
protected by the armor.
We have armored personnel vehicle. Is that what it is?
Armored personnel carrier. Yeah.
Armored personnel carrier. So that this is what they're doing to the Israelis, and that's what Netanyahu's call in the press conferences. We have to have unity. But I am shocked at the extent of the disunity and the extent to which the anti-Netanyahu crowd is willing to basically play to the script that was written for it by Hamas.
I don't want to say this about the whole protest movement, but there are many instances in which you have them saying that the real enemy is not Hamas, it is Netanyahu. This is not an interpretation. This is not an interpretation. Some of these leaders of the protest are often saying that the real danger is not Hamas, and the security apparatus version of this. I mean, the ex military men who say that, they say, with the enemy we know how to deal, but the real danger is that Israel has been being eaten from within by those radical forces, the Messianic Smutrich, the Haredim, the conservatives, the Likudniks, and especially the Netanyahu, whom some of them called the devil, in openly in demonstrations. So for them, and let me just try to explain this point of view, because I'm not saying they are evil. In their mind, in the minds of many of these people, the greatest danger to Zionism is binationalism, is to sink in an inextricably, is that a word, into a situation where the Jews become a minority in a huge Arab population. And so for some of them, this is a real emergency. And
it wasn't a word, but it was a real pleasure to watch you
watch me conjure it out of nothing.
Yeah, no, because your command of English is like 99%. So whenever you make a mistake with the 1%, it's really amusing.
I'll try to enlarge it to 2%. I like to amuse you, Mike. So, but the thing is, they are honestly worried that that this is the real danger to Zionism. If we don't break with the Palestinians, if we don't partition the land, then Zionism will sink into an Arab majority, and the concept of a Jewish democratic state will be a contradiction in terms the minute we don't have a Jewish majority. And so for them, this is the existential problem, and they've worked themselves up into a frenzy that you hear that you heard from the tweets that I read, because they have been stewing inside this gravy, this poisonous swamp for so long that they just, the hatred just comes in smoke out of their ears.
I probably, when I was 25, 28 years old, I probably would have had those attitudes, I think. Maybe. I can't tell, because I don't, but I've always been more security minded than anything. So, I mean, to me, like this argument about the Philadelphia corridor is just silly, because it is, if the goal is to end Hamas as a governing institution, if that's the goal, then you have to be on the Philadelphia corridor. So I have to conclude, like you do, that these guys are not actually trying to end Hamas as a governing institution. That's not their goal. They think, well, okay, we've destroyed their military capabilities, and we can go in whenever we want, and that's enough.
Yeah, I've made this argument, the argument of the left, I have to say, if I may compliment myself, very eloquently in the past, that people are always pulling this out on me, saying, but you said that Qassam rockets are nothing, and the real danger is democracy, is demography. Well, and I had a way of saying this that would neutralize the argument that there's something racist in the idea that we want to preserve a Jewish majority. So I used to say that demography is democracy. The demographic argument is the democratic argument, and other such. I defended this vehemently, and people are pulling this out on me now. But I have to say, Mike, that this whole debate is.
You wrote. I'm sorry to interrupt you. You wrote. I always apologize when I interrupt you. Otherwise, that guy on Rumble attacks me and says, "I'm not letting Dr. Taub speak." But I'm interrupting you in order to help open up your thinking for the world. You wrote a book on settlements, did you not?
Yeah.
A book hostile to the settlements.
Well, hostile is not the word. Critical of the settlements. Policy. I made a distinction between a Zionist of land and a Zionist of liberty, and I made the argument that if we expand the territory, then we are in danger of losing our democratic form of government, which is, by the way, true. It's just that the sword is on our neck, and that's a secondary consideration now, and we can continue to limp with the occupation, which is neither here nor there, until something changes. But we can't afford to give Judea and Samaria to a Hamas dominated population now. This is clear to everybody. But the book was an attempt to understand the adversary. So I looked at them as a political adversary, not as an enemy. And I went there and I talked to many settlers, and I spent time in settlements in the attempt to understand them. But anyway, I no longer stand behind the political argument that's in the book, but the interpretation of the settlers' ideology. To this day, I don't share their theology, but it was an exposition of their ideology. Now, I wanted to say, Mike, and I think that this whole debate is a debate that we are holding in front of the mirror. And there are a few things to say here about what's going on in Israel. First, I saw in the international media that people were reading the tweets of the radical left and, of course, the Israeli press, which is a propaganda arm of the left. We shouldn't let this fact evade our discussion, because the people in the United States draw conclusions about Israel from the press, but the press in Israel is like the press in the United States. It's a liberal-dominated media with a very orderly narrative that it forbids to challenge. And so the narrative was that there is this great upheaval, and Netanyahu is just teetering on the cliff of destruction. And then you saw the press conference, and he's not acting like he's teetering on the edge of destruction, because he knows that the majority of the public is with him. And so all these, we saw all these. I heard people quoting all these polls, all these public opinion polls, saying that the majority of Israelis are supportive of a deal to release the hostages. And of course they are. Everybody is for it. I'm for a deal. Everybody's for a deal for the return of the hostages, but not at any price. And this is just a media information op, because they're not specifying the deal. So when you have specific questions, like there was a question in channel 11 about the Philadelphia corridor, and there 49% are for staying and 46% have been convinced that we can leave it temporarily. But then you have to look at the way the questions are phrased, and the idea that everybody is against Netanyahu on the issue is just preposterous. It relies on the fact that you are not telling people what the deal is. And Mike, our friend, we consider him a friend. Nobody knows who he is. I actually corresponded with him once, or maybe more than once, because I tried to find out something about the identity of Hamas operatives that the press called children. It turns out they were late teens in Hamas brigades. And this guy is apparently an intelligence officer, because his knowledge is amazing. He calls himself Abu Ali Express. He has an English-speaking channel. I know you and your fellow policy analysts, people who take information seriously, follow Abu Ali Express and trust him.
Abu Ali is a if he's just a single person. If he's just a single person, his output is amazing. I suspect he's more than that, but he is an open source intelligence expert. So I don't know anything about the guy personally, but he I would assume that someone who does what he does as well as he does, and he does the whole Middle East, but he really whenever he gets to Turkey, I start shaking my head. He's really good at looking at Gaza and Yudav Shomron. Lebanon also. Sorry, the West Bank. He also goes a little bit astray in Lebanon, to be honest with you. Wow. But his core competency is the Palestinians, and I would guess that he worked inside Israeli intelligence as an open source analyst for years. Now he's doing it privately. Does he have support of the Israeli government? Who knows? I doubt it.
I don't think so. I don't think so.
I don't think so. It feels it feels like an independent individual, but with skills that were honed in an
organization.
In an organization.
It's just too good. So
yeah,
he got frustrated. He or they. I don't know what his pronouns are, Mike. Maybe it's Z. They anyway. He got frustrated with all this media campaign about the hostages, and so he decided to do a poll on his Telegram channel. Now, his Telegram channel, to the best of my knowledge, is the biggest in Israel. People follow him religiously. Everyone, journalists, the general public, people, 400,000.
He's got the best news. He's got the best news on what's happening in the Palestinian arena. There's no doubt.
Here's a secret. Part of our secret, and it can be yours, dear viewer or listeners. Follow Abu Ali Express.
You were supposed to open this podcast by saying, please subscribe and please like. Apparently liking also matters.
Yeah, liking matters.
Liking matters because it changes the algorithm. The algorithm.
Love used to matter. Now only like.
No, yeah.
Okay, so Abu Ali conducted a poll. You can do that on Telegram. You can. There's a poll function like there is on Twitter. And he asked his followers to vote on the Hamas on the hostage deal, with one difference. He prefaced the poll with the Hamas conditions for a deal. And of course, this is not a scientific poll, but 51,000 people voted within 2 hours. And here are the results. The results are 10% only of his followers are willing to support the deal with the deal that's actually on the table for Hamas. And 81 are against it, while 9% said they don't know. 81% against the deal. So maybe we should say a word, Mike, about what the deal is, because there is no deal. There is no deal on the table. It's a bluff. So what Hamas agrees to, according to Abu Ali, is first a permanent ceasefire, ending the war. Secondly, a retreat of the IDF from the whole of the Gaza Strip, including the security perimeter, including the Netzarim corridor, and including the Philadelphia corridor. The Philadelphia corridor has been isolated, singled out, as if this were the whole picture. It's not. Third, a reconstruction of the Gaza Strip. That means that Hamas will stay in power. And secondly, they have the ratio of how many prisoners they want released. So in the first stage, 50 prisoners for every female soldier, 30 prisoners for every civilian released. And in the second stage, 500 terrorists for every Israeli soldier released. So if you asked Israelis, do you agree to this? This is of course an impression. It's not a scientific poll, but it's very indicative. And we could also note that the strike they had declared in the day after that was supposed to bring Netanyahu down. The head of the roof organization of unions did something illegal and declared a national strike, and it collapsed by 2 p.m. It was illegal. So the court dragged its feet before saying so, but in the end it did, and people were outraged.
Was it unprecedented? I couldn't remember if the Histadrut, the Labor Federation, called the strike during the judicial reform crisis. Did they?
I think they only threatened to, and the protest movement described this as like the nuclear option. This is the doomsday scenario, and then it was revealed as a bluff. Nothing happened. And people didn't strike because the majority of workers don't think that this is a relevant issue. And the majority of Israelis do not support the hysteria on the left. And so what you saw in the international press, as if like the whole country erupted against Netanyahu and the whole economy was going to be brought to a standstill. Nothing of all this happened, except that we managed to call the bluff of the anti-Netanyahu protest movement.
Well, that's really interesting because as I mentioned to you, I was busy with many other things, and I only dipped in to the news. I didn't follow it as closely, and I felt it worked on me. I felt like it was just an amazing, moment of crisis, a real turning point in the war, and that maybe this was the beginning of the end of the Netanyahu government and so on. And you're telling me no, that this is just business as usual as we have. Well, I'm asking you, is this business as usual as we have been analyzing it all along? Or was this, they certainly tried to pull out all the stops and everybody lined up, Gallant, Gantz and Eisenkot, the Americans are there. Remember, in our last time we were wondering, how come Blinken is actually coming on the side of Netanyahu? So the Americans are back lined up with all of the opposition, and the security establishment was leaking like mad to the press. The press, the security establishment, Gantz, Eisenkot, the Americans, and they had this issue which is very emotional. You can understand a lot of, like you say, we can understand the hostages' families, but a lot of people who would say, okay, let's just save them while we can. So it felt like a turning point to me, but maybe not, I guess.
I think it had different effects. One effect, that the emotional effect of the execution of the hostages was extreme, and so for the first time, a demonstration of the anti-Netanyahu movement could muster serious numbers. It's not the numbers that they're boasting. We now have analysis of the junction where they do their demonstrations. They used to say 250,000. Now they said 80,000. Some of the press said 100,000. AI analysts say that only about 16,000 can fit in this space at all. So it seems like they were back on the horse, back in the saddle, you say in English, right? We say a la sus, we say in Israel.
Yeah.
They were back in the saddle. The protest was igniting again. That was not true. The minority of protesters grew slightly under the emotional impact. They tried their doomsday weapon, and that failed with a whimper. And so, to a certain extent, the bluff was called. On the other hand, everyone learned that the execution of hostages is a way to drive a wedge in Israel's society. And in that respect, this is even more infuriating, because what are you people doing? You are teaching Sinwar that killing hostages achieves his goals. If he is out to drive a wedge in Israel's society, you are teaching him that he is doing the right thing. And therefore, I think, to return to my first tantrum, is that the right-wing feed was on target, saying we should exact a terrible price from Hamas for executing hostages, because otherwise we're teaching them the opposite lesson of the one we want to. Secondly, if I may mention a nuance here, is that we heard that America is taking a step back from its support of Israel's position on the Philadelphia corridor, and I think it was Kirby, the Pentagon PR person, who said that in the original Biden
National Security Council,
the Security Council, sorry. So he said that in the original Biden proposal, there was no, there was a demand to retreat from the Philadelphia corridor, and that's not true. The original, as Amit Segal, your favorite journalist here, pointed out, the original Biden proposal said that Israel would retreat from densely populated areas, including Rafah and near the Philadelphia corridor. But the Philadelphia corridor, the densely populated areas are no longer densely populated, and the area near the Philadelphia corridor has been razed to the ground. So
no, the issue there, I believe, I didn't see Kirby's statement, but the point here is that Israel took the Philadelphia corridor after Biden's original proposal. So it's not that it just wasn't even being discussed at the time, because it wasn't part of the reality. Now it's part of the reality. So that's the game that's being played, is that Israel changed the proposal. Well, no, the reality changed around the proposal. Let me, on that note, on your point of rewarding the terrorists for killing hostages, let me read you something out of the Israeli press today, which caught my eye, and I strongly, my spidey senses tell me that this is true. But this is from Anna Barsky from Ma'ariv. I don't know much about her at all, but I find her to be often very sensible. I would add her, as in the list of people that I think is part of the press establishment, but is often talking sense. At least that's my impression. Anyway, she said Israeli political officials anticipate the following scenario as the most likely one for the immediate future. The Americans will put a final proposal on the table, a take it or leave it proposal. This proposal will be banned for Israel and will be relatively worse than the current proposal that has already been rejected by Hamas. The Israeli officials also believe that the final proposal will cancel the negotiations between the various stages of the deal and will demand that the parties agree to all the stages in one go. The final result will be the end of the war and Israel's withdrawal from the Gaza Strip. Responsibility for the Philadelphia corridor will be offered to an international force and one constellation or another. It looks like Hamas leaders with Sinwar at the top will be granted assurances that they will not be assassinated. The officials also believe that Israel will reject this proposal and that the Americans will pivot from carrots to sticks by refraining from using their veto in the UN Security Council, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, there's two ways to interpret this. One is you can say that Anna Barsky, is simply adding another plank to the argument as to why Netanyahu should agree to get out of the Philadelphia corridor, because if he doesn't, the pressure from America is going to get a lot worse, and Israel's situation will deteriorate. Okay, let's dismiss that part. That is politicized. But I suspect that her read on what the Americans are going to do is correct. That the Americans are going to the Americans will come up with another bridging proposal, and that bridging proposal will move closer to Hamas. Now, I'll be delighted if that isn't the case, but so far that has been the pattern. It's the pattern in American negotiations with Iran, and it's the pattern in American negotiations with Hamas.
That's a very bad pattern to work with. And this was the Trump administration's criticism of America's handling of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, wasn't it? That every time the Palestinians say no, they get a better offer. So why should they say yes? And this is, Kissinger once remarked about Clinton's attempt to reach a deal between Israel and the Palestinians, that if the mediator wants the deal more than the two sides do, then the chances that the deal will be achieved go down. And this is a very Kissingerian analysis. And once again, he is also right. So, Mike, why don't we move to your favorite segment, which is responses to readers and viewers and listeners' comments.
Oh, okay. I thought it was your favorite segment because these viewers' comments are always,
you choose the one. You're very nobly. You always choose the ones that compliment me, and never choose the ones that say Gadi is rambling on and Mike is a real analyst and so forth. Or maybe your eye does not register these. No, I've got one here. That compliments me. Are you ready? I'm ready. Should I brace myself?
No, it's not that bad. It doesn't. There's no slapping you. Okay, so this is from James West to East, and he says, good Egypt analysis, Mike. You remember that was the one that I made while you were reading about Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie or something. Also, good Egypt analysis, Mike. I was listening. One more element, though. Now, beginning to understand the extent of the tunnel and smuggling network between Egypt and Gaza. How does the USA respond to this? Or at least, how should the USA respond? Aiding Hamas seems to be a total violation of any peace accord. Yes, the United States should respond, as you and I have been saying, by not rewarding Hamas. It should also be responding by encouraging Egypt to stand tough against Hamas. But American policy is doing two things. Look, American policy is appeasing Iran. The American thesis is that the Houthis and Hezbollah will end their fighting once there's a ceasefire in Gaza. And so the alternative of putting together a regional coalition to put pressure on Iran to stop supporting all of these proxies against Israel is unacceptable to the administration, because it will lead to a military escalation and to many other consequences that it doesn't want to countenance. And so instead, it's saying the way to get a peace and quiet with Iran and its proxies is to put pressure on Israel. That's the message to Egypt, which is suffering more than any other country from the Houthi activities, because they are blocking commercial shipping Suez Canal. The message to Egypt is, help us put pressure on Israel to get the concessions from the necessary concessions on the Philadelphia corridor in order to meet Hamas's demands, so we can get the ceasefire. So American policy is creating a coalition, a regional coalition that puts the emphasis on pressuring Israel. And so Egypt is, of course, not going to tell the Americans to go take a flying leap. It's gonna go along with that.
Yeah. Shall we go to the? I don't know what you said because Brad and Angelina just divorced. I learned. Did you know that?
No, I haven't been following, but you'll tell me all about it, I'm sure.
Yeah, I will. But so we are now at the.
You weren't listening because when I talk, you fall asleep.
Exactly. This is the secret of our podcast cooperation. You don't actually annoy me.
because you don't hear it.
No,
that's usually the kind of lovely live and let live that married couples have after 20 or 30 years.
It reminded me of one of our favorite listeners. She's a lovely woman. She listens to us every time, and she said she puts it before she goes to sleep, and she goes to sleep with our podcast. She actually then knows everything we said. I know that for a fact, but it was very sweet.
But the question is, which one of us does more to put her to sleep?
You always compete, but I'm just saying we're a soothing podcast in general. That's lovely.
Yeah, right.
And now for the dumbest take, and your dumbest take is actually more.
It's not. It's not. I like to be amusing.
Funny.
No, it's not funny at all. It's actually quite serious. Tucker Carlson put this guy on, who I think has been on a show before. His name's Daryl Cooper. He's got a Twitter feed called Martyr Made and a Substack called Martyr Made. And Tucker Carlson heralded him. The dumbest take is that Tucker Carlson heralded him as the finest historian of our age. Look, in short, Daryl Cooper's an anti-Semite, and he's getting more and more play, not just from Tucker. Daryl Cooper has a relationship with this guy, Jocko. Jocko has a podcast which has millions of followers. Jocko is a former Navy SEAL. Jocko has got a whole business complex. He's got his podcast. He's got a motivational speakers series. He's got up in Maine. He has lifestyle. He sells a lifestyle company. I don't know what they sell. I didn't look at it, but maybe hunting knives and power drinks, because Jocko's in very good shape. He also teaches martial arts and managerial techniques, because he's been a Navy SEAL out managing men in war, and motivational speaker, but also how to kill people in an alley, and how to rip their lungs out with a pencil, that kind of thing. So then you buy his power drinks. But Jocko is a phenomenon. I mean, Piers Morgan had him on his show to explain Gaza to the masses. Because why? Yeah, because why does Jocko know about Gaza? Because Jocko's been a soldier, pointing his machine gun at nasty characters. So Jocko sometimes co-hosts another podcast with this guy, Daryl Cooper. They had, for example, they brought on guys from the survivors from the USS Liberty, which is an American ship that was bombed by the Israelis in 1967, which proves that Israel is an unreliable ally, and so on and so forth. It's a favorite episode, favorite issue of every anti-Semite out there, to explain why Israel is really anti-American and we shouldn't have anything to do with it. So Jocko plays footsie, even a little bit more than footsie, with Daryl Cooper. So does Tucker. So does a guy I know pretty well, Sagar and Jetty. And they're all in the same. They're all.
How about Candace Owens?
Candace Owens also. Candace Owens has gone, of all of these guys, if I rank them in terms of levels of anti-Semitism, there's there's Candace Owens, like crazy, batshit crazy anti-Semitism. And then Daryl Cooper is batshit crazy anti-Semitism, but masquerading as serious scholarship. There's a lot of his tone. There's a lot of really of reading behind what he's doing, and a historical argumentation, and a tone of I'm just a serious investigator. Nobody thinks Candace Owens is a serious investigator, right? But Daryl Cooper sounds to the uninitiated like he's a guy who's being very judicious. And before I say any more, why don't we just play the clip? Can we do that?
Yeah, we can do that.
Is that, oh, you're saying Churchill was the chief villain, therefore his enemies, you know, Adolf Hitler and so forth, were
Stalin,
the protagonists, right?
Yeah.
They're the good guys if you think he's a villain. That's not the case. That's not what I'm saying. You know, Germany, look, they put themselves into a position, and Adolf Hitler is chiefly responsible for this, but his whole regime is responsible for it, that when they went into the East in 1941, they launched a war where they were completely unprepared to deal with the millions and millions of prisoners of war, of local political prisoners and so forth, that they were going to have to handle. They went in with no plan for that. And they just threw these people into camps, and millions of people ended up dead there. You know, you have like letters as early as July, August 1941 from commandants of these makeshift camps that they're setting up for these millions of people who are surrendering or people they're rounding up. And so it's 2 months after, a month or two after Barbarossa was launched. And they're writing back to the high command in Berlin saying, we can't feed these people. We don't have the food to feed these people. And one of them actually says, rather than wait for them all to slowly starve this winter, wouldn't it be more humane to just finish them off quickly now? And so this is like 2 months into the invasion, right? And like my view on this, you know, I argue with my Zionist interlocutors about this all the time with regard to the current war in Gaza. Look, man, like maybe you, as the Germans, you felt like you had to invade to the east. Maybe you thought that Stalin was such a threat, or that if he launched a surprise attack and seized the oil fields in Romania, that you would now not have the fuel to actually respond, and you'd be crippled, and all of Europe would be under threat, and whatever it was, that like maybe you thought you had to do that. But at the end of the day, you launched that war with no plan to care for the millions and millions of civilians and prisoners of war that were going to come under your control. And millions of people died because of that.
So, Gadi, in this clip, what we saw, it's not too much of an exaggeration to say that Daryl Cooper said two things. One, the Holocaust was not planned. It's just sort of accidental, sort of bad management of detainees by the
it was a coup de grace. It was a favor they did, so the Jews don't have to starve.
Yeah, humanitarian
executions.
Humanitarian executions, and then secondly, he also says that Churchill's war was propelled by his well-heeled Jewish supporters, his war effort. And you have to understand that this is part of a larger argument that Churchill tricked the United States to fight his war for him. So it's not too much of an exaggeration to then say the elders of Zion activated or deployed to Churchill to pull the Americans into this unnecessary European war that has nothing to do with the United States. Now, this group that I'm talking about, Daryl Cooper, Martyr Made, I've been following him for a little while because I started to realize when I saw Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson. Do you remember Tucker Carlson came out against Nagasaki and Hiroshima and so on?
I remember he said that Israel emptied Bethlehem of Christians, which was disgusting slander, because there was a thriving Christian community in Bethlehem, as you call it in English, and then the Palestinian Authority took over and they started persecuting the minorities.
So this stuff is really pernicious, and let me tell you why this stuff is catching on. I think there's a number of reasons, and explain why it's pernicious. First of all, there's a political attraction to these arguments. Forget about the Jewish arguments. This is a pro-Trump, America first argument, and it's the kind of fake history for America first, because what it says, I mean, the feeling that people who are some of Trump's voters have is that the commitment of the American elite to the empire is destroying the republic. So that all the stuff that you and I complain about, that this elite is more concerned with its international connections and its status inside the country that come from the international connections than with the electorate and the electoral process, the nation, more concerned that with the global elite and its global status than it is with the nation. They have those same attitudes, so we share that with them. But then what they're doing is they're creating the kind of prehistory to the current moment, and they're saying, when did we go wrong? When did we choose the empire, or our leadership chose the empire over the republic, or the progressive internationalism over nationalism? Well, it was World War II. And now what they've done is they have created this sort of evil elders of Zion. What Daryl Cooper is doing is he's telling us that it was. You're on mute. I can't hear you.
I said that on his understanding or his interpretation, Churchill was the villain of World War II.
Churchill's the villain. He's not a hero. And the Americans who are holding up Churchill as a hero are really traitors to the nation, because we were tricked, manipulated, duped by this clever guy, Churchill, who was was a puppet on the strings of the Jews to get into this war. If we just get rid of the anti-Semitism for a moment and we just see the argument, this is a moment for that argument to be attractive, because people don't believe they're elite anymore. And then you get these guys like Jocko, and you realize that there's really an audience out there for this. Forget about the anti-Semitism for a moment. Just for the argument about choosing the nation over the empire. Imagine that audience, Gotti, is 5 million people, right? And imagine that you can get get them to pay for your Substack for $50 a year. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money. If you can get, imagine you could get 1 million subscribers to pay $50 a year. You've got more than $20,000 there, right? How much is that? 50,000 times 1 million.
You have 1 million subscribers for $50. It's 50 million. Yeah.
50 million. There we go. 50 million. That is more than 20,000. So $50 million. So it doesn't take huge numbers of subscribers to give you at least enough money to have a middle class salary, and you can even get more than that. And that's so there's a desire in this social media world to get that audience. I have more to say on this, but perhaps I should let you go to your.
I knew you would embarrass me if I hint something, but I
embarrassed you today?
Yeah, you did. But I'm used to you, Mike, and the metaphor that you chose for us, like a married couple, is apt. I would say a married couple in the advanced stages of decay. But I was so fascinated that I gave up my dumb mistake, and just to prove that I have one and I'm not just evading my responsibility, it was Nadav Eyal, and I'm gonna go back to it because it's so wonderful. But we're out of time, and we'll do this on our next episode. And I think, Mike, that we should make an issue of these anti-Semites, and especially of how a person like Tucker Carlson with amazing influence chooses to repeatedly entertain anti-Semitic themes. And I have to say that long ago, when I was following Tucker Carlson very closely because he exposed so much of the deep state machinations, and you kept saying that in your opinion there's anti-Semitism behind that, and you were proven right. You said closeted anti-Semite, or
I did say that. Yeah, I wouldn't have. I wouldn't. Now I think it's all out in the open, so I can say it. I never said it publicly until now. But I can smell it. I have a good nose for this. I don't know why.
Yeah.
The thing with the tell with him prior to this moment, when now he's coming. You can see it all. But before now, the fact was he never talked about Israel ever. He barely ever said the word. He would rail against the neocons. Bill Kristol, particularly, was one day he would scream about Bill Kristol, neocons, Iraq war, neocons. But he would never talk about Israel. And he also would suggest that there's no conflict with Iran. No conflict with Iran at all. So we're being duped into that. You know who's duping us into that, Gotti. You know who's duping us.
Yeah. So you have a smell for that because you are an honorary Jew, and Irit Linu, who is one of the I can't quote her, it's a personal thing, but she complimented you, even though she said you're a goy. She nevertheless complimented.
I do actually. That's very nice. That's very nice. I do want to return to this issue. I realize I did go on a little long on Daryl Cooper, but I think it's a big deal, and I want to. At a later date, I'm happy that you want to talk more about this anti-Semitism thing, because I want to explain if these guys, some of these guys are just going for audience. They don't actually believe a word of what they're saying, and I want to explain how anti-Semitism helps them get that audience.
Yeah, wow, that's very chilling, especially in the current moment. So thank you for being with us for this, I think, longest episode yet, but there was a lot to talk about, and I personally feel unburdened now, not by what has been, but because it's a very emotional moment, and I hope that people out there also needed to hear our take, because I think that the media is just botched it, trying to cover what's going on in Israel at the moment. So that's all from us for today. Next time we will keep our promise and be on Tuesday or so, I hope, and not on Wednesday.
So I hope I gotta. Yeah, well, hopefully.
I got mail asking when is the episode coming up? What's going on? So apparently, we have one follower, at least one follower. So thank you for being with us for this long time, and we'll see you next week.